Doctors of Reddit, what is your how the hell are you even alive right now story? When I was in trauma surgery in upstate by, got a notification about a man who was shot 3 times in the head. He comes in. Literally one eye hanging out of the socket. Blood everywhere. And he slumped forward. Apparently he was shot in the temple. Exited out his right eye socket. In the nose exited from the roof of the mouth. And in the cheek one with exit from the side of the head. This point I'm thinking they just brought him in so we can pronounce him in the ER because he looked dead. I go to examine him and tilt his head back. And he says you be gentle. I jump back and scream like a little boy. As did everyone in the room. Literally the bullets missed his brain in every single shot. Was he shot by a stormtrooper? Paramedic here. I ran a call on a guy that was ejected out of a late 80s Mustang. The guy said the car rolled 2 times before pitching him out of the driver's side window. He said he landed on his head and the 7-inch scalp avulsion seemed to corroborate his story. The car was completely crushed and sitting on its top. The guy wanted to refuse treatment and transport. GCS 15 and never lost consciousness. I insisted though that he be seen at the ER. He rode the whole way texting people. We have a patient we see at our hospital monthly. Young guy. Early 20s. Absolute turd to take care of. He has diabetes and essentially refuses to take his insulin. He comes in every time with diabetic ketoacidosis. Which is essentially your body going into a coma-like state due to your blood pH becoming acidotic and very elevated sugars. The impressive part isn't that he survives this. Most people do. It's that this is a recurring event every month and each time someone manages to find him get him to the hospital. If he was ever alone when this occurred and no one found him in a timely fashion, he'd be toast. My friend's father is an orthopedic surgeon and he told us a story that once a boyfriend and girlfriend came in because they tried an in-home abortion. By running her pelvis over with a car. Abortion worked but I hope they actually never reproduce. I'm not a doctor but I was EMS for a few years and one day we came up on an accident on the highway involving a motorcyclist and a minivan. Usually that is not good. At all. It's always a mess. We get there and find out he hit the minivan at 80 miles per hour while it was stopped on the side of the road and flew through the back window. Through to the front and survived without a scratch on him. No broken bone, no AMS, altered mental status, aka blunt head trauma. He even got himself out the van and asked if the people inside were okay. He was wearing a helmet and I think that saved his life. Blew my f-king mind. Not a doc. But I'm a paramedic. I had a patient shot 6 times in the chest with a 9mm at point blank range. Homie was still yelling at the other dude, now in custody, how he was gonna get out of the hospital and find him. I was pretty dumbfounded at how lucky this bastard was considering most people don't yell after 6 shots in the chest. Since you didn't specify how long they stayed alive. In med school I had a patient who got shot in the head a couple blocks away from the hospital. He was still able to talk for a few minutes after arrival. But it was clearly not a survivable injury. I stayed with him as his brain started to swell. I remember the moment his eyes became dull and his speech slurred to a stop. My first day as an EMT I had 6 calls. The 5th was a really old woman who had knocked on her head by falling in the bathroom. When we arrived, she was able to respond to us. Her sister handed me a stuffed wolf and said make sure she gets this. When we dropped her off at the hospital they had to immediately call the stroke team. I watched her die. And I never got a chance to give her the wolf. I saw the guy who got shot 9 times. 3 of which were in the neck. Nothing important got hit. So we just cleaned out the wounds. Packed and covered them. And that was it. There was a guy who OD'd. Was found by his roommate unconscious. Had to be resuscitated. Was barely responsive to painful stimuli. Blood pH was 6. Now normal blood pH is between 7. 35-7. 5. And remember pH is a logarithmic scale. Typically 6. 8 is not considered compatible with life. He ended up waking up and following commands for a bit. Just crazy. Not a doctor, friend who's a crime scene tech. They apparently tell this story to police now to remind them that unless somebody is 100% utterly dead, like head 20 meters from body, call the ambulance. Police rock up to an address of a couple of druggies. Enter and it's a mess. Mattress at the center of the living room floor and blood everywhere. Cannot reach the mattress without stepping in it. Spray on the walls and ceiling. 2 bodies on the mattress both covered in blood. Cops have to go round and enter through the back door just to get near them without f***ing up the scene. Cops check. But no signs of life. Call detectives who arrive and start investigating the scene. About 1 hour into it and one of the bodies takes a deep breath and starts to move. For some reason no one decides to shoot what was obviously a zombie. Turns out they got high and decided to end it all. Only one didn't succeed and just had a really strong nap. And that's why police in my state can't issue life extinct certificates unless they are looking at a 3-year-old skeleton. We have a homeless patient right now with active endocarditis, end-stage renal disease on dialysis, HIV, and a carcinoid tumor. Totally non-compliant with antibiotics even though he has a PICC line and shows up for dialysis once a week maximum. Never got chemo or surgery for the cancer. Constantly shows up to the ED looking for pain meds or in hypertensive emergency. After treatment he just walks out again. Gomers don't die. It's like all the walls on a house are collapsing inwards at once. So at a certain point they begin to support each other and the house won't finish collapsing. One time I had a patient who was walking in the street. Got hit by a car. Thrown into oncoming traffic. Bounced off another car. And then got pinned under a third. Or so the EMS report said. He had a dislocated shoulder and a non-displaced femur fracture. He was on cocaine. Which probably explained how he was able to scream at the trauma team to leave him alone. Edit. This happened a few months ago. Not Joe Black. Vet here. I had a patient come in recently with a PCV, packed cell volume. Basically how many red blood cells you have, of 12%. Super anemic. The normal range is about 35-55% and we tend to transfuse once it hits 20% as the animal should be struggling. Patient was walking around. Wagging tail and everything. Just a little pale. I work with a dude that has a family history of heart disease. Not many males in his immediate family branch reach past the age of 60. This man only has one vice. Food. I've seen him in action. At one point his caloric intake was over 10,000 calories a day. It's almost obscene of how many burger meals and giant tubs of soda he puts away in a day. I don't know the count but when he does need to see a doctor, they always marvel of how he is upright and not dead with his blood pressure so high. He's been told more than once that he should be dead. Edit. Even more surprising. He is not obese. He's pudgy and has that dad belly. But not enormous. He's certainly a wonder. Not a doctor. But when I was 18. My mom was at a stoplight when she was rear-ended by a diesel truck going 60. Her back was broken and her brain was bleeding. At the hospital. Her kidneys started to fail. She had internal bleeding. And her blood pressure was in the 20s. The doctor told us these facts and told us to say goodbye. A priest was there and offered her last rites. The next day she was stabilized and I can remember the doctor looking at her like WTF. 1. Opioid addict who was found after several hours in a sewage canal. He was in his 50s. Barely breathing. Had a broken femur but after naloxone he miraculously recovered enough to actually try escaping the ER. He walked to the entrance. Walked with a broken femur. 2. A 45-year-old painter. Hypertensive, high blood pressure. Diabetic heavy smoker of 30 years with a history of multiple heart attacks, 2 which were triple vessel. Was casually chain smoking in front of me as he explained his history. 3. The Pakistani politician Imran Khan's fall from a 10-12 height. On his back and head at the age of 60. Well, This story has happened somewhere around the 70s to my uncle and even made it to the newspaper. My uncle was driving on a scooter one afternoon on a country road when he was hit heavily by a car from the back. He fell off the scooter, flew through the windshield of the car and came to and hauled on the back seat. The driver of the car stepped on the brake so that he flew from the back seat again through the windshield and ended lying on the road. Except from some bruises, he was unharmed. When the police came, both my uncle and the driver of the car told the same story, which they didn't believe in the first place. However, my uncle had lost a shoe in the back of the car, so finally also the police got convinced. My grandma cut out the article from the newspaper and it is still in a frame in her living room. My brother's girlfriend is a medical student. On her second year she had a course on nursing. She had to help examine a woman who came for chest pain. She noticed an awful smell from the woman. The woman had stage IV breast cancer. Treated herself with homeopathy and her boobs were rotting. I'm the office manager, technician, secretary, janitor, accountant, what have you. Sole employee. Woohoo. Comma of an optometrist. Now, optometry isn't crazy exciting, so this'll be pretty tame compared to the other stuff posted. Patient is a rather elderly Hispanic woman. Presents with complaints with her near visual acuity and slight headaches. I take her in the back to refract her and take her eye up. Weird. Can't get a reading for the ARK. So now comes the tonometer. Right eye. 27. Oh. Double check. 24. I check the left eye. 49. 49. I double check it. 48. This lady's got full-blown glaucoma. Doc gets her in the chair. Turns out she's got glaucoma from a leaking cataract in OS. And early diabetic retinopathy in both eyes. Her visual acuity is 20/400. This lady can't see ST and NBSP. The kicker? She drove herself 24 miles to our office. My dad had a massive heart attack a few years ago. He proceeded to drive around for several hours disoriented and confused to where the hospital was. He went to a closed fire station and drove around the city for who knows how long. He had a complete 100% blockage in his left anterior descending artery. They call it the Widowmaker. Blessed to still have my old man around, to say the least. So, you're almost done with your first semester at optometry school. CVT here. I had a cat come in with severe renal failure. At least 95% of the kidneys were completely dead and blood was barely circulating through them. The blood toxicity levels were the highest I have ever seen while I've been in practice. It was amazing the cat could even stand on its own. It didn't make it very long, but I still found it amazing. Do you mean it was literally a cat? Or are you using some sort of beatnik slang? You can't kill cockroaches. A former attending. Trauma is a disease. Every trauma surgeon ever, the implication being people who do stupid shit and get hurt, are going keep doing stupid shit and getting hurt. And in my experience it is true. Especially drunk drivers. Close bracket. Nice folks though. Always have some terrible disease. If you want to live forever, just be a dick. My family is blessed with longevity. And as a result, I am convinced that anger and cruelty are the fountains of youth. If these comments had been written by hand, we wouldn't have understood them. My father-in-law went to the ER for some sort of pain and it was discovered that he had over 300 blood clots in his legs. Every single blood clot dissolved and he's alive and well. Anesthesiologist here. We had a fine young gentleman who was shot while diving away from a gang-related bullet. A single bullet hit his right subclavian vein. Went through his right lung, right diaphragm, liver, many loops of bowel. Hit both his left iliac artery and vein. And lodged in his sacrum. He coded, heart stopped. No blood pressure, in the ED. Got an ED thoracotomy. Internal cardiac massage. And got his heart restarted. 200 plus units of blood product and 10 hours of emergent surgery later. He made it to the ICU. Before that night, I had never seen someone survive after an ED thoracotomy and had never given someone that much blood. He walked out of the effing hospital. Obligatory, not a doctor, but my great grandmother and grandfather both scared doctors. My great grandmother did so by having a blood pressure of 240/190 for 3 months straight, including being on a no salt diet for 3 months minus 1 day of it, until one day it just dropped back to normal. There was no damage to her body anywhere, including with the blood vessels. My grandfather had polio when he was a kid. Think between World War I and World War II, and they thought he would die since it took out his ability to move anything below his lungs. He ended up being that bad, and then it was as if polio decided to just retreat. It was gone within a couple of weeks, and the only long-term damage after everything was minimal. He just had his growth plates inactive for a while, so he ended up fairly shorter than his dad and my dad. This one dude had a stomachache and thought it meant there was a tapeworm in his belly eating him alive. So he drank bleach and ammonia trying to smoke it out. In fairness to the guy, it might work. But I assume he didn't want the worm to escape through the new hole he's just burned through his abdomen. Son of a physician here. One year at scout camp, my brother had a 14-pound tea after severe constipation. My mother, the physician, who was there, was relieved that there was no organ tearing other than minor sphincter rippage. Don't think it was life-threatening, but would have been a nasty visit to the ER at least. I've been struck by 3 cars. Worked in a coal mine until a shaft collapsed with my team in it. Worked making fireworks until a stray spark detonated the powder shack I was walking out of. I've fallen off of roofs. And was even a passenger in a Jeep that flipped. I had a laptop battery that lasted for like 5 years. I was diagnosed with bilateral pneumonia while in boot camp. It started as a cold that got really bad. Really quick. Coughing up blood. Shortness of breath. etc. When I finally went to medical, I had a 103-degree fever and O2 sat of 65ish. Went to the hospital on base where they x-rayed me. I knew something was really bad when every person in the place was huddled around the picture pointing and giving me weird looks. Turns out about 80% of my lungs had filled up with fluid. I was eventually transported off base to an ICU where I spent 5 days getting my lungs drained and recovering. I still have doctors give me weird looks when they look at my medical files. Not a doctor. But once I read this story about this guy who came across this incredibly powerful narcotic. This narcotic slowly warped and twisted his mind. But always kept him physically strong and vigorous. Eventually, he started getting intense delusions. Experiencing extreme light sensitivity and began to shy away from people to a point that he became a recluse living in a cave. He still lived for decades by using and subsisting off wild game. He eventually burned to death in some sort of drug-induced state of euphoria. I hope this is a cryptic LOTR reference. OP should have titled this "Non-Doctors of Reddit." Sadly. I'm just here to see if anybody posted the Swamps of Dagobah story. You forgot this. Serious, e-diaresis. Back in 75 we lived in the country and we had 2 wolves and several other dogs. One morning after my mother had taken the kids to the bus stop, the male wolf got it into his head to attack me. I was on my back with this 95-pound wolf trying to rip out my throat. I'm fighting for all I'm worth. I'm prying his mouth off. I'm hitting him with my fist. My black lab broke a chain and came to the rescue and saved my life. My shirt was torn to shreds. I had puncture wounds in my throat. My fingers were torn. Had it not been for my lab, I'd have died. A week later Dad took the wolf off and shot him. The lab was a rescue dog. Dad had found her on the side of the road and brought her home. Never knew who to thank. The bad guy for dumping that dog on the road. Or Dad for saving her. Of course. I thanked the dog and she always got special treats. I'm not a doctor. But this guy where I worked got stabbed through his stomach. Cut his liver. Crushed his lung by a water ski. After this, he swam all the way back to shore. Bit 7 times by a brown recluse spider when I was 5. Don't even have scars. Doctor said by the 3rd bite I should have been in convulsions. I just remember they itched a lot. Found Spider-Man. It. Not doctors. Not a doctor. But I self-checked into a pish center because I was going through some shitty. They monitor all your vitals and stuff. My BP was 220/180. Fairly certain that's correct. I didn't even know because I didn't look. This was at 10 PM so they had to call the on-call doctor and checked it 3 times. Apparently me saying I felt normal was really weird. Handed me pills and said this is the dose I give people with heart failure. It's not weird to feel normal with high blood pressure. They call it the silent killer because hypertension generally goes undetected. In some cases people will feel warmth in their neck, face, headaches and feeling off. On the other hand, people with low blood pressure can have a lot more symptoms.